Well, good morning, everyone, or afternoon, or noon, or wherever you're zooming in from. Um, I'm Ruth Roselle, and I am delighted to welcome you to this Zoom session on behalf of Central Seminary and the Buttry Center for Peace and Nonviolence. Um, we are delighted that you have chosen to spend your time with us to learn about faithful action for such a time as this. A lot of disturbing things are happening in our country, and so we are privileged to have the Reverend Dr. Daniel Buttry share his perspective on what is occurring and his suggestions on how we are to respond as people of faith. And so we are really happy that you have chosen to spend this hour with us. Before I introduce Dan, let me say a few things about our time together. I invite you, as I have in the chat, to introduce yourself in the chat and tell us where you're zooming in from. Just to have a sense of being together in this. Then I encourage you to use the chat respectfully and thoughtfully during the session, but don't let it distract you from what Dan is sharing with us today. There will be an opportunity to ask questions toward the end of our time together. So preferably write your question in the Q&A function, which is down at the bottom of the screen, so that we will be sure to see it. But Dr. Terry Roselle and myself will be looking at the chat and trying to catch the questions that might come there as well. As many of you know, Dr. Terry Roselle is professor at Central Seminary in the area of ethics and ministry praxis. Otherwise, there may be time at the end of our session together to unmute and ask your questions yourself in your own voice. The session is being recorded, so others can view it later, and you'd be welcome to share it. So please mute yourself except when you're called upon to ask your question. And should we have the unfortunate situation of this Zoom call being interrupted, please just log back onto this same number, and we will continue from there. Before retiring, Dan Buttry served as the Global Consultant for Peace and Justice for the American Baptist Church's International Ministries for 17 years. It took him many places around the world, doing consultations and conflict transformation trainings in many countries. And so he's worked with people in repressive situations to help them figure out how to bring greater justice and reduce conflict in their area. He has that global perspective from being in many other places and working in many other places. And he will bring that global perspective to us to think about what's happening in our country. And he's got that experiential knowledge of what faithful action in such situations entails. Dan has been working in the area of peacemaking for pretty much all of his ministry years. He's worked as for the Baptist Peace Fellowship of North America, for the Peace Program of American Baptist National Ministries, Navajo Mission Societies. He's worked as a pastor in a couple different places, Boston and Dearborn. He's authored a lot of books on Christian peacemaking and Bible studies, and so he has a lot to draw on to share with us today. And the Buttry Center for Peace and Nonviolence was named for Dan and Sharon Buttry in honor of the good work that they've been doing in peace working and peacemaking around the world. So with that introduction, I'm going to turn this over to you, Dan. Dan, we are so eager to hear what you have to share with us today.
Oh, thank you so much, Ruth. Everybody can hear fine? Okay. I appreciate that introduction very much, although I do have to add an asterisk. You introduced me as Dr. Reverend Dr. Buttry, and I got my honorary doctorate from Central Seminary. And my son John was trying to explain what that all meant, and he said he's a doctor, but not the kind who helps people. So just put that into the intro. For such a time as this, I'm 73 years old, and I've never seen a time in the U.S. like what we're going through. Many people in the U.S., especially Native Americans, Indigenous people, African Americans, have experienced horrendous repression and violence and systematic racism, and and yet in those struggles, many times there were some things that could be used, like in the civil rights movement. There were efforts to get court decisions made, which allowed actions to be taken, such as bringing in the National Guard or the U.S. military to escort kids to school. There were congressional laws that were passed to allow for voting, and many things like that, structures in our Constitution that allowed for things to happen. Women, experienced a lot of systemic sexism and had no right to vote until I think it was the 1920s, somewhere around then. And so it might be easy to think this is just, white males discovering some problems that have been there for a long time. And in some degree, that's true. But there is a different thing that's happening that I have not seen in our country, although I've seen it in many other countries. And that's the shift from a democratic form of government toward authoritarianism. We've seen specific actions taken to undermine the Constitution. We've seen situations where court orders have not been followed, weakening the courts. We've seen even things where congressional laws are ignored or responded to very weakly. We've seen and we've seen a lot of complicity with both the courts and the legislature for allowing this increase of government. And we've seen in Minneapolis the kinds of things of unmarked cars coming and taking people masked. I remember struggling for justice and peace in Central America in the 80s and 90s. And that's what the death squads did, is they would go in unmarked cars, masked people and seize people. And it's like, this is happening on our streets. And citizens are being murdered with no accountability. We've got these new prisons that are being set up for immigrants, supposedly major criminals, but we're finding out that many people are there who have no criminal record. Some of them are legal immigrants whose the laws are being changed on which they came to our country or being ignored. And what happens next after the immigrants? What are you going to do? How are you going to fill these facilities? And there's actually writing and statements that have been made that protesters like me, we may be the next occupants for those large facilities that are being constructed or remodeled or whatever. So we are in a different time for this country, a time that's been seen in many places around the world. And I think we're in a whole new situation. And so I'd like to explore what we can do in the time ahead, how we can engage. And I've got 4 things that I'd like to look at, a tool for how we can strategize and try to engage people. I'd like to look at the lifestyle of small groups that can be engaged in resistance. I'd like to take a look at Christians against Christian nationalism and talk about that dynamic and where we may be. And then how we can speak about what it means to be a Christian for such a time as this, what our witness may specifically take. And then we'll open it up for questions, okay? So let's plunge into this. I'm not a huge techie, and we've tried this, so if there's any glitches, I just ask for a little bit of grace along the way. But I've got a website that will be in the comments, globalpeacewarriors.org, globalpeacewarriors.org. which is a huge website, all kinds of resources. But among the resources are over 20 short videos about training videos, basically. And we're going to go to two of those. They're very short, but to introduce a tool that's called the social barometer. So let me go to that. And it's two videos that we will be doing. Whoa, I got this thing that's in the way. There we go. We'd like to share with you a tool that's called either the Social Barometer or Spectrum of Allies. It's a great tool for looking at how to move people on an issue that you are very concerned about. On any issue, doesn't matter what it is, you will find the people who are the leading activists, the people who are strong about that issue, who live, breathe, sweat that issue, and they're going to be concerned about it and the driving force for it. But on the other side, you have the leading opponents, the people who are set in their ways on the other side of the issue, that are very, very determined. They're the people in power about whatever it is that you're concerned about. Now, you also have the people who are your active allies. They're the people who agree with you and who show up when you have an action, when you want to do something. They're the ones you can count on, active allies. But there's also people like that on the other side, the active opponents. They're the people who work with your opponents and who show up and carry out their concerns. Now you have people who agree with you but don't do much. They're the ones we call the passive allies. They may agree with you, they may wear a ribbon or a wristband, they may sign a petition. Once in a long while, they may actually show up for a demonstration if that's going on, but they're not there for most of the events. You've got those same people on the other side, the passive opponents. They disagree with you, but they don't do much to threaten you or overturn your situation. They just don't think you're right. Then you got the people right in the middle, the neutrals. They can be neutral for a lot of reasons. They may be oblivious to what's going on. Or they may just be so overwhelmed by their own life. Maybe they're a student who's struggling to get through school and they're not doing very well, and so they just got to really knuckle down and focus. Or maybe a single parent who's overwhelmed with the children and the job, and I haven't got time to give to any issue. Maybe they're dealing with a health crisis. It can be all kinds of reasons, good legitimate reasons, why people may be neutral and just can't pay attention to the issue. Now, on all these things, we often set it up that for me to win, I have to get everybody over to where I am. That is not going to happen. It's just never going to happen that everybody will agree with you and be as passionate about your concern as you are. So don't even waste the energy trying to see that come to pass. Instead, as this tool shows, if we can move people just one slot over closer to us, we strengthen our movement. And that's something worth celebrating. If I can get some of the active allies to become leaders, that strengthens my movement. If I can get some of the passive folks to become more committed and more active and show up, that strengthens my movement. If I can get those in the middle to agree with me, even if they don't do much, that strengthens my movement. If I can get the passive opponents to have some questions where they say, whoa, I'm not so sure about this, and they back off and become neutral, that strengthens my movement. If I can even get the active opponents to back off their activity and become passive, that can strengthen my movement. So many nonviolent movements will have a key turning point when the police or the military who are actively supporting the oppressive power, when they back off and refuse to follow orders. We saw that in the Philippines people power movement when the soldiers refused to follow Marcos's orders. We saw that in so many movements where the police and the military end up saying, we're not going to carry out these orders. This is the people that are speaking, and so we will just be passive. And that's when the change, the tipping point happens. So it's not so much getting everybody over to your side and as strongly and passionately involved as you.
It's just moving people one slot over.
So, this is the tool, and we're going to explore it because sometimes it's a little difficult to see how it works until you plunge into a particular issue. So, we're going to look at this tool in action in the story of Esther from Esther chapter 4. And I'm just going to review the story briefly. In the book of Esther, the Jews, many of them were in Persia under the Persian Empire in exile, and Mordecai was connected to the king and did some things, and as a result, a guy named Haman became very jealous, and he decided that he needed to get rid of Mordecai, and so he came up with this idea: let's kill all the Jews, commit genocide, basically. And he took it to the king, and the king agreed and wrote the law that the Jews would all be killed. And so Mordecai began this, in the beginning of chapter 4, begins this nonviolent protest, fasting, which many Jews were fasting at the time, but they were all doing it privately. But Mordecai is out in public at the gate, and he connects to Esther, to whom he's related. Esther had become a queen in the Persian court. She won a beauty contest. That's a long story. But she hears about Mordecai in sackcloth and ashes, and she sends him clothes. That's a wonderful way to deal with genocide, isn't it? Sending clothes to people. But that shows how clueless she was. But now Mordecai's got her the relationship to her, and he begins to educate her, tells her about the decree, and so then she says, okay, but I can't do anything. If I go into the king's presence, without permission, I could be killed. And so Mordecai then shifts his strategy and challenges her, first with a vision. God's going to do something. Deliverance is going to come from some quarter. But then he challenges her personally, says, perhaps you were sent to the kingdom for such a time as this. And then Esther changes from being passive to saying, she's all in. I'm going to do it. If I die, I die. She's 100% in. And that's kind of the end of chapter 4. But then as we read a little bit further, then she goes to the king. She's kind of ends up building a relationship with him, and so on. And so that's the story. And we're going to now explore that story in detail with the social barometer tool. So let's see what happened to my screen. There, whoops. So we'll go up to the next one. These are all from the Global Peace Warriors website.
A good way to understand how the social barometer or spectrum of allies works is to see it against the biblical story found in Esther chapter 4. And so I'd like you to pause the video and read the entire chapter now. A good way to see how the social barometer or spectrum of allies works is to use it with the story we find in Esther chapter 4. There we start the story with only one activist, and that's Mordecai. The problem is that the Persian government has issued an edict that all Jews in Persia are going to be killed. Mordecai is aware of it, and he begins a nonviolent protest. He wears the normal garb of grieving, and he goes and does it at the gate, the main gate of the city. So it's this nonviolent public action. We also see, on the other hand, the leading opponent is Haman. He's the one that cooked up the idea to kill the Jews. There's no active allies. The active opponent is the king. He listened to what Haman said, and he came up with a law about how all the Jews should be killed. The passive allies are the Jewish people. They are upset. They know this is a problem, but they are grieving privately in their homes, all alone. The passive opponents are the Persian court. They don't know much of what's going on, but whatever the king says is fine with them. They always go for what he says. And in the middle, oblivious, is Esther. She's neutral. She's a queen in the Persian court. She's Jewish, but she doesn't know what's going on. Oblivious. So Mordecai takes his action, this nonviolent public action, that connects to Esther, and she responds by saying, what's going on? Building relationship is so important for activists. So he builds relationship, makes that connection, and then he starts to educate her. He tells her what's going on, presents the documents, he's done his homework, and she moves to a passive ally. She sees the problem, but she says, I can't do anything about it. The king hasn't even seen me for 30 days. If I go, I could be killed. I can't do anything. So Mordecai changes his strategy. Now he's got her understanding we got a problem, but he's got to build his commitment. So now Mordecai changes his strategy. He's got her seeing the problem, but now he's got to build her connection to the problem, her identification with the people who are at risk. And so he says, you may be queen in the palace, but that doesn't mean you're going to avoid this. So he builds that connection to the suffering people. The second thing he does is he gives her a vision. God's going to do something, whether you're a part of it or not. Third thing he does is challenge her to action. He says, perhaps you were sent to the kingdom for such a time as this. And so we see Esther now, she's moved from neutral to a passive ally, and now she's totally committed, and she becomes a leading activist. She says, if I die, I die. I'm in 100%. Esther now takes the lead. Mordecai steps back and supports Esther in what she does. She goes to the Jews, and she says, I want you to do what you're doing, but now I want you to do it as a part of a movement. I want you to pray and fast in support of me as I go to present our concerns to the king. And so she moves the Jews from being passive allies to being active allies. Then she goes to the Persian court, and she moves them from being passive opponents to being active allies through her relationship with them. She's had this relationship as queen and connected with them. Some of them are her servants, and she says, I want you to fast and to pray as well. And so they move and they join this movement in support of stopping the genocide. It's interesting now how all the power is shifting over to the side of the Jews. And once she's done her organizing and building her base, now she's ready to approach the king. She starts by building her relationship. And her start is a highly risky one because she goes into the royal throne room, which is illegal. But she does it in a soft way, if you will. She just comes inside the door and stands and waits until the king notices her. And then when he notices her and allows her to speak, she continues to build relationships, says, wouldn't you like to come have dinner with me? And so he has dinner. She fixes one of his favorite things, and he says, oh, this is so good, whatever you want, I'll be glad to give it to you. And she says, come to dinner tomorrow. And she continues building the relationship with the king until she feels it's ready. And then she does some very interesting things. She opens up all that's been happening that the king has been unaware of, the intrigues in the palace between Mordecai and Haman. She shows how Haman has been jealous of Mordecai, and that's why he wanted to kill the Jews, because Mordecai didn't bow to Haman. Mordecai would only bow to the king. And so she exposed the motivations behind Haman. She also exposed how he was trying to buy his way into power. And so this opened up the king's eyes to all the intrigues that were going on. Now the king, after he sees what's going on, he is stuck with a real dilemma, because they had what they called the laws of the Medes and Persians, which means once you've put it into law, you can't change it. So the king had set this law about the Jews being killed. What can he do? The king went from the active opponent all the way to being an active ally, because he comes up with the solution. He says, I'll make a new law that whoever kills Jews, they'll be killed. So of course nobody's going to want to kill the Jews. So the king joins in the movement to stop the genocide. And then you're left with Haman, the one behind it all. He's completely isolated. The power is removed, and you end up with the Jews being saved.
So that's the story that we have that shows us how the social barometer works. And so I want you to, in fact, I think we've got the handout for that in the Buttry Center sections, and the link should be in the chat if you want a copy of the social barometer. It's also called Spectrum of Allies. You'll see it in different forms in different places. But you got a sense of it now. And the thing to keep in mind here is the people that we know. How can we engage the people we know in a constructive way? I don't know if you've had conversations like I've had where we just end up butting heads with each other. That doesn't tend to work. So instead, if we can work on relationship building and helping people to be exposed to different realities, sometimes telling stories, depending on where the person is. We've got a lot of people in our church who I'd call passive allies. And so finding some small ways, some steps that can move them to more active involvement, and then the neutral folks. But I've got a cousin named Frank who is a very conservative person. He's passive opponent to active opponent, depending on what's going on. And Frank and I, we both work intentionally on our relationship. We both love rock music. We both love classical music. We love all kinds of music, and we spend a lot of time in that. We're also family. We're cousins, and we share a lot about that. We share about being grandparents. And so when we talk about politics, we talk about that in the context of care and spending time building and nurturing that relationship, the ties that are with us together. And so it's interesting on Facebook, we both comment on each other's political stuff on Facebook. And it's interesting, his friends are terrible toward me. My friends are terrible toward him, but we love each other and we connect. And I think that's one of the things that we need to work with. There is an organization, by the way, if you haven't heard of them, called Braver Angels. It's Republicans and Democrats that get together to talk positively about issues and trying to maintain these positive relationships, kind of like I have with my cousin Frank. And so I would encourage you to check that out. But I don't want to just have nice dialogue. I want to try to win people over, move them one slot over. And so thinking about the different kinds of strategies for moving people just one slot over can be very, very helpful. But relationship building is a really key part of that. So I want to encourage you in that. We can talk on and on for that. I usually do trainings. We'll spend a couple hours on this, but we don't have that time. So the next thing I'd like to talk about is small groups for action. My first in-depth struggle was when I was a pastor in Boston, and we formed a peace group that was involved in the nuclear, trying to get the nuclear freeze and other anti-nuclear stuff going on. And then we were also resisting the wars in Central America. And one of the things that we discovered is that we had kind of this pendulum going back and forth. Sometimes we'd be so intense on action. There were people from our church that got arrested, including me, and going before the deacons, talking about it, and all that. And then it was very intense time related to those demonstrations. But then there would be times when, in between the actions, it's kind of like wintertime, there's been less for the No Kings, unless you're in Minneapolis, then it's very intense. But for a lot of us, now it's a lesser time. And we found that those were times when we needed to work on a couple things. One was relationships with each other, especially since we were going to be going through tough and difficult things, where we could be arrested or we could be victims of police violence, which did happen to the members of our church, or we could also deepen our faith understanding that motivates us for engagement there. And so doing Bible study, and I was asked by the faith team of the No Kings movement to develop a Bible study on resisting authority. There's a long history to that. I wrote major Bible studies on let's see, where are we here? Major Bible studies on conflict transformation. And so I ended up doing a variation of this. The people who invited me had seen those Bible studies. And so we quickly put together this Resisting Authoritarian Bible study, which has gone across the country. And it's now also in Spanish. And they even have done a Latin American version, because this version specifically relates to the U.S. in our current context. And the Latin American said we're dealing with the same thing, but in different ways. And so let me just show you the contents. We talk about cultural things, how to use the Bible study. But the first thing, conflict is holy ground, based on Exodus. And then moving people in your direction, the Esther 4 story, social barometer, which we just did. And then we take the story of Rizpah in 2 Samuel 21. Sharon and I wrote a book called Daughters of Rizpah. If you really want to plunge into that story of women moved through trauma to become change agents. It's a powerful story in the Bible that I never, ever heard anybody preach on when I was in seminary or growing up. And then loving enemies through transforming initiatives, the Sermon on the Mount, and an example from 2 Kings. Holy non-cooperation. We find that in the Bible, not cooperating with authoritarian governments in Exodus and in Daniel. And then symbolic protest actions that we see in the Bible. And finally, overcoming evil with good, and then how to connect to people, and so on. So there it is, okay. So that's a Bible study resource, and we've put how to get it, both I think in the chat, but it's also at the Buttry Center website, so that you can link in and get that, and feel free to use it with study groups, either in your church, or if you've got an action group of Christians that would like to plunge deeper, that would be really cool. Now, one of the things that's going on is we've seen a huge increase in what's called Christian nationalism. It's religious nationalism in support of authoritarian governments is an old thing. And it's happened all around the world. In every major religion has a version of it, where that religious group ends up supporting the authoritarian government and the violence done in the name of that government to others. And we're seeing that happen right now in our country with the, some of you seen some of the work of Turning Point, which has got a real commitment to undoing the racial justice things, real commitment to getting immigrants out of the country. And they claim to be Christian. And some of my family members are, aligned with that. And they claim to be Christian, and there's some parts in which they're wonderfully Christian. But there's other parts where they have completely gone different from, supporting things that are very non-Christian, the racism and the violence toward immigrants, hostility, so on. And this has become structurally a part of our society now. And so I don't know if you've heard of the Baptist Joint Committee. The Baptist Joint Committee's been around a long time. Baptists were a key part in getting the separation of church and state. It was John Leland who got that into the Constitution by playing political hardball with James Madison. Leland was a Baptist evangelist, but he supported the religious rights of everybody, including Jews, including Muslims, including atheists. And so it's very interesting, because he said, if if religion gets tied to the state, it actually harms our faith, harms religion. And so this is a part of our Baptist tradition. And the Baptist Joint Committee was formed to work for religious freedom activities. And so they did things like working for legislation on religious issues, taking cases to the Supreme Court, even for people like Jehovah's Witnesses or sometimes Native Americans who wouldn't go to the Supreme Court for their religious rights. The Baptist Joint Committee was their advocate and won many, many cases that way. Now, things have changed, as we've said, and the Baptist Joint Committee has changed as well. And so they have developed an organized Christians Against Christian Nationalism. And so this you can see just christiansagainstchristiannationalism.org, and it's also on the Baptist Joint Committee website, and it's going all kinds of things. So, we believe that Christian nationalism threatens our faith and our country, and all kinds of stuff about it and resources, and you can connect to that. I would strongly encourage you to plunge into this. Now, we have a group in Detroit. We call it, it's a Detroit chapter of Christians Against Christian Nationalism, but we've changed it a little bit. We call it Detroiters Against Christian Nationalism because we're a very interfaith city. I live in Hamtramck, a city that's surrounded by Detroit, and we have a majority Muslim population, majority immigrant population. We've got also Muslims and immigrants in Troy, which is like one of the ultra higher class suburbs. So, almost all my doctors, probably 75% of my doctors are immigrants. And it's really, we decided that we would make this a interfaith effort because it affects all of us. It affects all of us. And as Christians, we want to be in the lead because it's our brothers and sisters in Christ who are causing the problems. So we don't mind being in the lead, but we also invite others to be with us. So one of the discussions that's developing is, when do we cross the line where this becomes a more serious thing that causes us to look at what kind of faith commitment we have? Back during Nazi Germany, the Nazis kind of co-opted the church. The Lutheran Church, supported the socialist, National Socialist government, and so they developed this confessing church. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a key part of that, Martin Niemöller, and so the question: do we get to a point where we need something like that? In South Africa, they had the apartheid system. And do you know where apartheid started? It didn't start with the Nationalist Party. It started around the communion table. And people like, I was in Assemblies of God Church for three years, and I met this guy. I'm blanking on his name. He was called Mr. Pentecost, and he was from South Africa. He was one of the founders of the apartheid thinking, and he was this great Pentecostal leader. Andrew Murray, who wrote wonderful books about, our personal relationship with Jesus. He was a South African who was a part of setting up the apartheid thinking in the church, and then it became political. And so the church in South Africa then ended up writing the Kairos document to say, we're in Kairos, this special time, this moment of church history when we need to stand up for what the gospel of Jesus Christ is all about and how we're going to live it in our context. There was a similar document that came in Palestine. So many of our friends who may be Christian nationalists have also become Christian Zionists, and that whatever Israel does is God's plan. In fact, Christian Zionists can sometimes be stronger than Israelis in terms of their political embracing of whatever the Israeli government or Israeli army does. And so the Palestinian Christians, about a tenth of Palestinians are Christians, they ended up writing their own Kairos document, challenging Christian Zionism with what they saw as real gospel teaching. And one of the co-authors was Johanna Catanaccio, who is a dear friend of mine and lives in Nazareth, teaches at the Nazareth Evangelical College. And I've done a lot of work with Johanna over the years. So are we coming to a time when we need a confessing church in the U.S., a Kairos document in the U.S.? I don't know, but there are discussions going on right now. And so you need to know that. And if you want to be a part of things like that, kind of let me know and I can keep you in the loop for what's going on. So to conclude my part, my content, it gets to what is the gospel? How do we present it? There's a lot of Christians, and by the way, some people have called me evangelical, but okay. Just interesting intro to hear that I'm an evangelical, but I'm okay. I went to Wheaton College, I went to Gordon Conwell Seminary. Just that's been very much my roots, and a lot of people say, just you got to confess that Jesus is Lord and ask him into your heart, forgive your sins, and then that's okay. Well, that's not what the Bible teaches. Jesus said, that whoever says to me, Lord, Lord, but doesn't do what I say, they're not really there. And so I think as Christians today, we need to be challenging people not just to call Jesus Lord and ask for forgiveness of sins, but call people to follow Jesus. To say Jesus is Lord means I do things Jesus' way. And so I think a focus on the Sermon on the Mount is great. My pastor last week preached on loving your enemies. Just a really powerful thing to focus on is what it means to love your enemies. How does that look today? And then Matthew 25, which is the last judgment, and Jesus speaks about those who are hungry, those who are naked, those who are in prison, those who are sick, those who are strangers, immigrants. And he says, as you did it to these, the least of these, you did it to me. And so that should be the basis for our ethics is who are the least of these and how are we treating them? And so if the government is treating them terrible, we shouldn't be supporting the government in that way. We should be involved in resistance or in ministry to those who are vulnerable. And so where is Jesus today, according to Matthew 25? Jesus is in a detention center down in Texas. And what are we going to do about that? I'm just a few feet away from my chair, my place that I love to sit. And above my chair is a beautiful icon done by the Baptists in Georgia. The Baptists in Georgia do these icons. Pam, you may have a copy or a Georgian icon in your office. I don't know. There's been some connections to Georgia and Central over the years. But this icon was done by this Baptist, and it has Jesus in the middle, and all around him are pictures of the person who's, hungry, naked, in prison, sick, etc., the stranger, and each one of those has the halo over them, and then the how is the Christian relating to them? It's a beautiful icon that challenges us to live as Jesus said to live. So that's a part of where my spirituality is anchored these days, and I would really encourage you just to plunge into Matthew 25 and the Sermon on the Mount, Sermon on the Plain, and that's how we're going to be showing the faithfulness to Christ at a time such as this. So we have some time for questions, and I'll be glad to take anything. If Terry, are you handling that?
Yeah, so Dan, we have in the chat, Charles posted regarding the story of Esther. And interesting comment. I see in the story of Esther, if we are to transition from neutral or active allies, don't demonstrate, fast and pray. There are accounts in scripture where we are able to do this in secret. Come in quietly to the king's court like Esther. Build relationships organically. Small groups are crucial in this effort. Unity in spirit and passion exhibited through prayer and service. How do you respond?
Yeah, there's more than one way to do things, and so I think that the understanding of the body of Christ can be really helpful at this. There will be people like Esther who have access, and so finding those people, supporting them if we know them. Um, uh, we know some people in politics from our work here in Michigan, and find ways to support them. There's other times when we need to be involved in protest, and standing up to what's going on. And that's why in the Bible study, I show some of those stories that we have of symbolic actions that were taken, or even one of the really interesting ethical things. So Terry, you can put this in your study. Courses on ethics is the Hebrew midwives in Egypt who lied to Pharaoh to hide the children who were going to be victims of murder, and God blessed them. And so sometimes they were involved in resistance. I'm going to be having a meeting, joining in a meeting on Saturday here in Hamtramck. We're expecting ICE to hit the Detroit area. We've got little tiny actions that are, kind of more typical, regular kind of actions, but we're expecting a more major thing similar to what happened in Minneapolis or California, Chicago, to come to us in Detroit. And so we're already mobilizing. So depending on your position and where you are in society, in the church, your part may be different from others, but here the image of the body of Christ, and knowing and supporting one another, whatever our call may be.
Thank you. Our faculty colleague Samuel comments that Esther's example shows the power of prayerful behind the scenes faithfulness, but it also shows the courage to speak when the moment requires it. Our work can hold both. I'm wondering, there are a number of pastors on this call, and a whole lot of pastors, both evangelical and more mainline, find themselves in congregations and communities that are very heterogeneous in terms of political sympathies and perspectives. And so they take a neutral stance. What are your thoughts?
Great question. Great question. And as a pastor who's been through all kinds of stuff, I know a little bit about those challenges. I think that I had, when I was going to get arrested, I took it to the board of deacons, and I said, I'm not just Joe Citizen, I'm your pastor. So that's a part of the getting arrested would be that I'd be representing the church and doing that. And had a guy who was on the first wave on D-Day in Omaha Beach, and then also fought in the Korean War, long story. But he said, Pastor, I disagree with you on the politics, but I want my pastor to be a person of conviction and courage. And so I support you 100% in this, which was just an amazing thing. All the vets supported me in that action. But relationships is behind that, So I think relationships, focusing on the relationships and finding where people are, what is triggering some people, and trying to help people find their way back to the Matthew 25 triggers, and help people to connect on those human relational kinds of things. Our church that I'm a member of now is huge about the homeless. We've housed the homeless. We always pick what are likely to be the two worst weeks of the winter, and the end of January and early February, and we nailed it this year. It was in single digits or below zero most of the time when we were involved hosting the homeless, and so that's a place to help people think, what's going on? How's Jesus here? Where is Jesus? And get people, and that's, I think, part of that work in the social barometer to move people is to see where they are, to have connections, and then what can you do to move them one step over? And for each person, it's going to be different. And sometimes you can prepare yourself by thinking through the people that you'd like to talk to, whether they're in your church or somewhere else. But as a pastor, being careful to lift up Jesus first and foremost, and what it means in these days and age. I think calling people to follow Jesus, and you don't need to get into the politics of it necessarily, but you can get into, what would Jesus call us to do? What is Jesus calling you to do? And how can we be faithful? And we can tell all kinds of stories. There's a lot in the gospel.
So Retha's comments that neutrality is so disappointing, as if the kingdom of God were morally neutral. And I feel some of that. I also have empathy for those pastors who are in positions like you and I have been in as well. Is it neutral to do what you just suggested, Dan? Or is that more of the nature of an Esther sort of approach initially, which is quiet but not neutral? Is just preaching Jesus, but without applying it specifically to murdering protesters in the street. Is that neutral, or is it?
Yeah, good question. I think Martin Luther King's Jr.'s letter from Birmingham jail was two Christian pastors,
right,
who were being neutral during the civil rights movement. Yeah. And a real challenge to us. It's a good letter to read again and again. So for a time like this, I'd put that down as homework. And so there come time. I think there's a combination of things, a yes and. Through the relationships that we have with people, we want to be connecting to them and helping them to move on their journey of faith, but keep it Christ-centered. And then, how do we apply living what Jesus says? I mean, how do you take Matthew 25 at a time when, be with the sick? Well, what if the sick are losing all their health care? What if the poor who are hungry are losing their school lunches? There's things like this that we can do. I was during the Reagan administration, I was living in Boston, and I was the chair of an organization that did both. We were the chair for all of Habitat for Humanity in Boston, and we also did non-habitat housing. We worked like crazy to get like 6 units of habitat homes built. And we got a lot of volunteers from some big evangelical super churches coming down. And one of the things I challenged them is I said, while we've been working on these 6, the government has changed policies that have left 3,000 families in the greater Boston area homeless. I say, do the math, 3,000 to 6. It's like if we're doing all this work to help the homeless, and then we're voting in such a way that we're blowing out all the smithereens, we need to take a look. And so sometimes there come those moments when we need to bring that prophetic edge. And sometimes, it's I think, the church in Germany faced that, the church in South Africa faced that, church in the U.S. faced that during the civil rights era. And I think we're going to be facing it, and we are facing it to some degree now. And that's kind of my challenge. But keeping the relationship, even when people go nuts on you. And I think, sometimes challenging people say, that I love Jesus. And in fact, that's what's driving me. I want to let's go to the Bible together about it.
Pastor Nancy says that she finds it helpful to invite people in small group Bible studies to think about where they are and how they are responding to current challenges. It's moving some people one spot over on the social barometer.
Mm-hmm.
And Sarita adds a clarification, if you were following the chat, to her previous comment. Ruth asks, what should be the relationship between the large nonviolent movements of resistance in the U.S. and people of faith? What should be the relationship between these movements of resistance and people of faith?
I think there's a lot. During the Central America, the resistance was mostly people of faith. The Pledge of Resistance came out of a retreat from, and Gustavo Perejón from Nicaragua was the one that stimulated the Pledge of Resistance, pushing the U.S. radical Christians to go further. Today, I find that it's a real mix of folks, all kinds of people, and we're kind of in a time where there's a lot of post-Christian contexts, a lot of younger folks that have left churches. My church, we've got a lot of younger folks, but it's a really interesting mix, and many of them are refugees from fundamentalist churches. They've been cast out for whatever reason. But I'm losing my train of thought here. I think, say the question or comment again, Terry.
What should be the relationship between the large, non-violent,
Yes.
invisible, MoveOn.org,
Yes.
etc.
Yes.
Those movements of resistance and people of faith.
Yes, there is a faith movement, a faith committee within No Kings. No Kings and Indivisible work very, very closely together.
Yeah.
There's a lot of blurring of the lines. So they were the ones that asked me to do the Bible study. And they're promoting the Bible study at various levels. There's 3 trainers for the No Kings movement that are kind of their leaders, and one's Daniel Hunter. I mentored Daniel Hunter when he was a teenager and took him with me to. I see we got some folks from Myanmar on the. I took him to Northeast India when he was 18 and to Myanmar and Indonesia when he was 19. He was already a world-class trainer there. And Daniel's now, one of the top trainers. Daniel was the one that asked me to do the Bible study guide. And so in our church, we have a group of people. A Bible study group asked me to come and talk about what's going on. And so I kind of did a presentation much like this, including the social barometer. And out of that, a number of people have been coming with me to the No Kings rallies. And one of our pastors has been there as well at the No Kings rally. So we got a little church group that goes there together. And it's so I think, finding these groups, sometimes you can form an official group, whether you call it a Bible study or whatever, peacemakers group, and get into that back and forth between action and relationship building and deepening of faith, so that you can go back to the action with more clarity, intentionality, and strength, holy strength.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. We are getting close to the end of the hour here, so I'm going to step in and say thank you, Dan, so much for sharing your wisdom and your insights into the situation that we're finding ourselves in and um, discussing with us what should be our response as people of faith in such a time as this. We're so grateful for this gift, and thanks to Terry for facilitating some of that conversation. There will be some future Zoom events that will continue to address what following Jesus looks like within our current situation. So I encourage you, when you get a Buttry Center letter, to open it and check out what's inside, or look at the events page of Central Seminary or the Buttry Center page on that seminary website, or the Facebook page we have for the Buttry Center for Peace and Nonviolence. And you'll see both those events on the Facebook page. I'll be also posting some other kinds of resources that can help in this whole area. We do have a blog called Pondering Peace that also has some discussion of some of these issues. So I hope you make use of that, and that we will see you again in a future event here on Zoom. But until then, may the blessings of God's peace and God's hope be with you all. Thank you so much for coming.